create a path through all of these shapes. I'll often
Hey, Jim.
Hey, Don. My friend Dee is here already also.
I see that. I'm going to try to just share my screen to see. I have the program up and can you see that?
Yep.
Okay. So if I can get out of that. All right. It's good.
So I have, if I could share my screen, I have like 10 slides I'd like to show.
Yeah, I'm going to, right now, I'm going to make
Great.
you the, on the co-host. Let's see. So you're a co-host, and then when Steve and James get on, I'll make them the co-host too, and
Great.
you could share whatever you want to do.
Yeah, Jim was there briefly, but he couldn't, he was invisible. So he's trying to change his settings.
Okay.
And I'm going to try sharing my screen right now.
Okay.
How's that look?
Yeah, that's good.
Great. That's Chapman's Peregrine Falcon
From the
diorama.
museum. Yeah. I just posted a YouTube video of it's probably a few years old, of Steve Quinn doing like a birding tour of talking about Chapman and doing a tour through the Museum of Natural History on Chapman's displays.
That's great. I'd love to see that.
Yeah, I know I saw it years ago, but I just came across it today, so I posted it.
I'll have to look for that. I really enjoyed the book.
Yeah, it was, the two things that came out of it for me, I'll talk about when we get on, but was what an adventurer that he was.
Yes.
And how we you never thought of him. You always see this guy in this nice suit and tie. You never thought him as an adventurer, right? That really risked his life. He was lucky he survived some of these things.
Yep.
Right. And also I fell in love with Fuerte's paintings,
Oh, yeah.
And him as an individual too. So so those are the really two big things I took away from that. But I was having a discussion with somebody today that it's a shame. There should be a state park. There should be a national park in his name,
Yep. I
Steve,
agree.
Steve is here, and I made Steve the co-host too. There he is. You're muted, Steve, so you can unmute yourself.
I didn't see him there with that camouflage on.
Yeah. Should be down to the left of your screen, usually, Steve, a little microphone. Hit mute or probably a little microphone with a line through it somewhere.
Thank you, Don. Thanks.
There you
Can
go.
you hear me
There
now?
you go.
Yes.
Very good. Very good.
So, Steve, I was just telling Jim that I posted a YouTube video of you at the museum doing like a tour of Chapman, talking about Chapman and doing a tour of his displays. So
that was many years ago.
So I'll tell the group today when they get on that they could go on Facebook and take a look at it.
Oh, that's great. That's great.
I'll try to put it on the blog too, get more people looking at it.
Oh,
Yeah.
that's terrific. Terrific.
Steve, I'm going to talk very briefly about the Peregrine Falcon diorama, if that's okay.
Yeah, the site right behind you looks just like it.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that's perfect. Perfect. That's great.
We got a nice peregrine hanging out at the butterfly garden every day, which I just posted another picture of it. It's don't go birding anywhere. Go to the butterfly garden. You'll have it's like eagles all over, couple merlins, peregrines, it's just
Oh,
you
yeah.
just stay in one place and have a blast over there.
And that scene behind Jim, that's like the ultimate place to photograph peregrines.
Oh
It's
yeah,
just
yeah,
that
You
north,
know-
yeah,
that it's such a great lookout.
yeah.
The beast is missing apparently.
Yeah, I heard that. There's another female there.
Oh, I know there's the male's there, but they haven't seen the beast in a few days.
Hmm.
So usually she is so photogenic and
Yeah,
outgoing. I'd
yeah.
go there and she'd fly up to me.
Okay, that's great.
Yeah. That'll be a shame if she's gone, but that happens.
Yeah. Also, I think I mentioned, but I'll tell Steve as well.
What's up?
I have I'm going to show the pictures of the ivory-billed woodpecker skeleton.
Terrific. Did Peter help you get
Yes.
that? That's
Yes.
terrific. That's great. Peter actually is on standby. I was so concerned because I'm down in Virginia here.
Oh, right. Yes.
And I was so concerned that I might not be able to connect with you guys that I contacted Peter and asked him to be in standby.
Huh.
I'll tell you guys, but you have to be sworn to secrecy because some people have a problem with this, but I'm down in Virginia deer hunting.
That's why we're in the camouflage.
I just got out of the woods.
Yeah.
Well, I'll
Sure
tell
thing
you
for
something.
me.
You probably got bigger deer in Bergen County than you'll find in.
Yeah, no, I actually, 2 nights ago, I got a very nice big 7-point buck, a very nice big buck. So
Oh,
Wow.
Quinn family will have venison for Christmas this year.
That's great.
yeah. I got, I'm a vegetarian. I got far less problem with what you do with the way the factory farms work.
Oh, exactly, exactly. That's yeah.
That should bother people a lot more than somebody shooting a deer.
Yeah.
Yes.
And honestly, I say a prayer to Saint Francis every time I go out hunting that I control myself and the animal just drops immediately. And this was the case in this instance. So I was very pleased.
You using a rifle or?
Yeah. Yeah. Beautiful. I was in a blind last night and a beautiful barred owl landed in a sweet gum tree and right next to the blind.
Oh, no kidding.
Was calling in the evening light. It was just great. Very nice.
It's good. It's always nice. Yeah. Remember trying to do birding and fishing at the same time back in the day.
Oh, yes.
I haven't fished in years since my brother passed, but I remember standing in the stream with binoculars on and a fishing rod in one hand. And I remember seeing 7 species of warblers standing still.
Oh, yes.
And
Must have been out trout fishing then in the
right,
spring.
trout fishing, right?
Yeah.
And then I got enjoy just relaxing with the binoculars a lot more. But I like watching the guys fish. I like seeing them, seeing what they catch, and I just really I'm amazed at what's going on in the Hackensack River with the striped bass fishing now.
Oh, it's terrific.
Oh my God.
Unbelievable. Yeah.
Yeah, watch
Right in
those
Ridgefield
guys.
Park, right near the old VFW hall. The
Right.
fellows fish behind the VFW hall, and they're like 30-pound fish they're bringing in.
Incredible.
It's
River Barge,
unbelievable. It's great
River
to
Barge
see.
Park, and even right by New Bridge Landing.
Oh, yes, right.
Yeah, it's incredible. It's incredible. It's great to see. Yeah.
Well, Don, anytime you'd like to get back into, I fly fish now. I just
Oh,
fly
do you?
fish. Anytime you'd like to get back in and come along, just please give me a call.
I might take you up on that one day.
Yeah, please do, please do.
Yeah.
So hopefully Jim Huffstodt will
Yeah,
come
I
back.
hope he can join us. Otherwise, we'll be ad-libbing tonight.
He was invisible. He came on and his background was there, but he wasn't. So I'm still not sure he exists.
Right.
I've never seen
See if
him.
I got some kind of email from him or anything.
Yeah.
Well,
I
please send me the correct link address for tonight's program. Oh, okay. Okay, see what's happening here.
Great. So he still has 11 minutes before we start. So he should be in decent shape.
Okay, did that.
By the way, we're recording, Steve, just in case you want to talk about any of your hunting again.
Oh, okay. All right. Yes, yes. Thank you, Mike, Jim.
Okay, sent him that. Let's see what happens.
That's why it's always good to log on early, just in case. Zoom is always Murphy's Law at work.
I know. I'm amazed at. Hello, Joe. How are you?
Fine. How's everybody else?
Good.
Good.
Joe, you look very comfortable there.
Yeah,
I am. Relax.
looks like you're melting.
Just sent him the meeting link. I just.
There he is. He's still invisible.
Here?
He's in the middle right-hand side with the birds, but no person.
Oh, yeah.
And it's muted.
Mute Swan.
Maybe if you just
He's unmuted.
There he goes.
Okay, hello.
yeah, we see
Well-
birds, but we don't see you.
Well, maybe that's a good thing. I don't, I apologize, but you can hear me. That's something anyway.
Yeah, I don't know. Well, it's probably hard at this point, but maybe if you just got rid of the background, we might see it. But then again,
Well, if somebody can guide me in doing that, Jim made a couple suggestions, but I
didn't work.
couldn't find talking about.
So I got somebody else asking me for the link here.
Yeah, I've found there's a separate button that says, on my computer says Zoom. And you go in there and there's this tiny little gear in the upper right-hand corner, and you click on that, you can adjust your background to do all sorts of things. But it's like a
Wow.
hidden thing. It's like an Easter egg on Super Mario Brothers.
That's a good analogy, and I'm a little too old for Mario Brothers and too dumb for this stuff too.
I see a nice Audubon print in the back there from Linda's iPad.
Oh, yeah, great blue heron there.
Yep.
Stephen Quinn,
Yes,
you're
sir.
there, aren't you? Stephen,
sir.
I just want to tell you again, Windows on Nature, that was a wonderful book. And
Yep.
when it dawned on me that you are the Stephen Quinn, I almost fell out of my chair.
Oh, well, thank you, sir. Thank you, sir.
Oh,
I
man.
really appreciate that.
Well, I
It was a- it
appreciate
was a
what
labor
you
of love.
did. The same for me with my biography and Jim Wright. I mean, so many people, a book there's the author's name, one person, but it's very misleading, it's a group effort. And that's at least that was the case with me. I mean,
Well,
so many people.
there's mutual admiration because I love your book on Chapman. It's long
Oh,
overdue, and
Yes.
you're to be commended for recognizing how significant a conservationist and such a key player he was in the history of conservation in the United States. Terrific book.
Yeah,
Well,
Don
thank
was
you.
saying
Thank you.
earlier that he thinks it's amazing there's not a park or a national park or something, national wildlife refuge named after him, given
Exactly.
all he's done.
The guy is amazing. He's terrific.
I'm sorry.
No,
Go
it's
ahead.
okay.
Don.
No, I was just going to say, especially here, since he's such a local hero. I mean, to us, we're doing the Christmas bird count in 2 days. I mean, and he lived right here in the heart of Bergen County area, birded here. I mean, and then he just, things happen. I guess you get forgotten about, but he should not be forgotten about at all. We wouldn't be probably doing what we do today without him.
Yeah.
Exactly.
The
You're
Christmas
absolutely
bird count, I looked at the original circles and one of them was Englewood Teaneck, Hackensack.
Oh, is
Yeah.
that one of the original,
Yeah.
like 20 original or something like
Yeah,
that?
something like
Yeah.
11 or 14, something like that.
Something like that. Yeah,
And
yeah.
they saw 80 species total.
That's terrific. Terrific. I believe it started in 1900.
Yep.
Right.
Wonderful.
And
Yeah, he was a pioneer, that's for sure, in so many ways. And he introduced so many people to bird watching or birding, as many of us describe ourselves today.
And for the most part, there really wasn't a such thing as ornithology at the time, really,
Right.
No, you're right.
No, and the kind of ornithology there was, bird studies, all was inside. You didn't go, in those days, you didn't go outside to do anything. You stayed in a laboratory and did studies.
Right. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, of his many contributions, one, he was definitely against the ivory tower, just sitting there, making observations and doing studies and watching the species get wiped off the mat. He wanted to be an activist. He
Yeah.
wanted to, get out there and turn the wind that was blowing against our birds and all wildlife. And he did it. I mean, my God. what a
James,
guy.
we've got to rewind. Dawn, is the meeting actually starting? Can folks
No,
hear
not
this?
yet. We're talking.
Okay, because
We
these
didn't
are
really
such
start
great,
yet.
these are such
we'll get-
great comments. We
Yeah.
have to have folks hear this.
Yeah, we'll give it 2 more minutes and we'll
Okay,
keep
sure.
going and
Now, Don, I'm going to repeat my request. I start blabbing and it's hard to stop me. And I
Okay.
know we decided a certain time limit, and I think that's wise. So don't be shy about saying, Jim, okay, shut up, get off the
no,
air.
it's okay. That's why we have a mute button on.
Oh, good.
Maybe
I
we-
gotta be.
I was just gonna say, maybe we can have a code that your birds are starting to fly.
Maybe so, or
That's good. I like
one
that.
of those, one of those old hooks that they used in vaudeville. The hook came out and pulled the guy
Yes.
off the stage.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, especially when I talk about Chapman, because I get excited about it. I mean, I love the guy. I feel like, I know him and admire him so much. But of course, he had his flaws. And hey,
Oh, well,
like all of us.
like who doesn't, like a human being, right? We all, of course, nowadays you're not supposed to have flaws, but
Yeah,
but yeah, so
that's right.
so when we get to you doing your presentation, I could log on to the program that you did, and then you could talk about a few of the, as you talk about him, I can go through some of the slides for you if you want to do that.
That would be fine. Yeah, and that would probably prompt my thoughts.
Yeah,
And
but
the
I
introduction, I just,
Yeah.
I don't want to. I'm going to just mention a few of his contributions and kind of explain how I became so fascinated
Yeah,
with
that's
this
really
largely forgotten man.
right. That's what we want to know. Let's see. I just want to see how many people are still logging on here. Well, I'll tell you what. I'll welcome everybody, and thank you for coming tonight. I've been excited about having this program for a long time now, and we finally pulled it off when we got everybody together in one place. And hopefully we'll bring you some. If you know about Frank Chapman before, you will tonight, and you'll know why he's plays such an important part, not only to Bergen County Audubon, but to all of us. Just some mentions of things coming up. Of course, we have our Christmas bird count on Saturday, and our highlighted count will be at Teaneck Creek, but there's other ones going around in the area. And we have Harrier Meadow on Sunday at 10 a.m. You can come out for that. And we have January coming up, which is Eagle Month, with all our big Eagle events, including Eagle Festival on January 14th. So don't miss that. That's at the Court Park this year. So I'm going to turn it over to Marilyn to do our introductions. Take it away, Marilyn.
Thank you, Don, and welcome everybody. And special thanks to our three presenters. We're fortunate tonight to have three very knowledgeable people that we also all know to talk with us about Frank Chapman. James Huffstodt, you may recall, those of you who came to our June Zoom presentation, discussed his book at that point in time. And we're also joined tonight by Jim Wright and Stephen Quinn, both of whom are recipients of Bergen County Audubon's Frank Chapman Award. Jim, as many of you know, is a longtime friend of and member of Bergen County Audubon, wrote just this morning about Frank Chapman and the bird count, and he writes an article for the Record every other week. He also has his latest book is about screech owls. And we learned about screech owls from Jim I think it was just last month, but I believe, yes, he's shaking his head, it was November. So it's nice to have your expertise as well. And I always like, Jim, the state line lookout photo that you appear in front of you do the count all the time in the fall as well. We're also joined by Steve Quinn, who is a Frank Chapman Award winner, recipient, I should say, excuse me. And Steve knows very well the work of Frank Chapman because, like Frank Chapman, he also worked at the Museum of Natural History. Steve also has a comment at the end of James' book, so he is also well aware, and I appreciate that all of you joined us. So I believe, Don, we're starting with James Huffstodt and his book, and I'll turn it back over to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Marilyn. So what I'm going to try to do is share my screen and we'll have some pictures of his book and some pictures of Chapman, and we'll see how it goes from there. Okay, everybody can see that? Or... Yeah, good.
Terrific. Yep.
Yes.
All right. So James, if you want to talk about your book and why you wrote it and how you got interested in Chapman.
Well, it all began, I was working for the Florida Fish and Wildlife Commission down in West Palm Beach. And I would occasionally contribute to our magazine, Florida Wildlife, which sadly is no longer published. And I loved history. I loved nature too. And I did a lot of articles related to both. Well, I was in a giant used bookstore down in Fort Lauderdale, and I ran across some books by Chapman, and I knew him. I think the first time I ever was really aware of him was when I was working previously for the Illinois Department of Conservation in the early 80s. And I remember it distinctly because I was with the Audubon, one of the Audubon guys, and it was about 5 o'clock in the morning, a freezing, snowy day, and dark. And this gentleman, I can't recall his name right now, but we were standing on the banks of the frozen Sangamon River, and he was talking to barred owls who were out there across the water in the dark. And at that time, I love nature, but I thought to myself, what in the world am I doing out here at this hour? And I'm freezing to death. Well, that was 40 plus years ago. Things have changed now. And part of the reason was Frank Chapman. As I said, jumping back to that used bookstore, I found one of his early books, 1909, Camps and Cruises of an Ornithologist. And, you know, he was a great writer. And he could write he was multilingual. He could write for the general public, and I certainly was the general public when it came to birds. Well, maybe a little bit. You know, I worked with ornithologists, so I picked up a few things. But I read that book, and I did an article for Florida Wildlife Magazine, and one thing led to another. And even before I retired, I was spending hours and hours researching this man. And by the way, the books written by, the blog and other items written by Jim Wright and Mr. Quinn were tremendous researches. And when I learned that I was sharing the platform with them, I was just overwhelmed. And I'm so proud to share the platform with such distinguished gentlemen and winners of the Chapman Award. You know, Chapman here is 1939. He was up there, but he worked for that museum for 54 years. And one of the impetuses behind the book was I knew about the Christmas bird count. Most Audubon members have a pretty good idea that he was behind the count, which was perhaps his greatest achievement, although I think you could make an argument for his role in laying the foundations of South American ornithology. Here he is as a young man, and he grew up right there in Bergen County, New Jersey. He grew up among the birds. And I was enchanted to learn how he knew the birds by their songs, their calls, before he knew their names, before he could read. Talking about sitting up in a cherry tree with cedar waxwings, trying to eat the cherries before they got to them. And, you know, he was a man that, he was a scientist, and yet he wrote with emotion. Here's one of his mentors, and I can't recall this gentleman's name right now, but he was one of the greats. And moving right along here, let's see our next one here. And of course, he came to the museum when he began, as we were discussing before the meeting started. There was not an ornithology course in any American university, much less a major. He didn't go to a university, and he said quite frankly, he said that they don't talk about what I'm interested in. He was interested in nature. Now, there were zoology courses, but nothing specific to ornithology. He helped bring about that change. You know, he came up the hard way on the job, but he didn't have that prejudice like, oh, these college boys don't know what they're talking about. Right from the beginning, he worked with Cornell University and its leadership to strengthen the nascent bird program. He saw that they needed training in ornithology. He was a man of big ideas. And my gosh, you know, just touching on them, if you want to read Stephen Quinn's book, I highly recommend it. It's Windows on Nature. That was only one contribution he made, and that was the diorama. And it was different in that, one, he went to a specific site with a specific reason. The species he focused on was endangered. He didn't want this just to be a pretty display. One, he wanted it biologically accurate. He wanted the actual birds, their actual nest, as much as he could get. He took back everything from sand and rocks and vegetation. And if he couldn't bring it back, he recreated it, or his assistants did at the museum. And he revolutionized the museum world, not only here, but in Europe and South America, across the globe. And here, back in the old days, you know, this was about it. And he came in and changed it. Again, as I mentioned, South American ornithology, his great books, Distribution of Birds of Ecuador and Distribution of Birds in Colombia, and some others are really foundation stones. And I've read articles by some prominent modern day Colombian ornithologists who still talk about his great, could we go back one here?
Sure.
We could go back, his great contributions. Now, Florida, he came down there, his mother had a winter home in Gainesville, and he loved Florida, and he played a big role here. He was one of the founding members of the first Florida Audubon Society. He, in that role, helped hire some of our first game wardens. Guy Bradley, tragically, who was murdered by plume hunters. Chapman had met him down in the Keys and left behind a reminiscence. And at that time, he talked about him and talked about how he dodged bullets. And of course, most of us, I think, know what this was all about. The great wading birds were being slaughtered during their nesting period, and they were being slaughtered for their beautiful egrets, breeding plumes, which were used to decorate ladies' hats. It wasn't just in Florida, it was around the world, and they were killing millions of birds. But what was worse is when they killed the adults, the chicks were left to starve, to die of exposure, of malnutrition, and of course, easy prey for the alligators, the raccoons, whoever else was around. And Chapman recalls paddling the Everglades, and you could smell a shot out rookery from a mile away if the wind was right. And he vowed to stop that. And not alone, he had a lot of help. One of the people that, let's go back to the lady in the tent. One of the people that did that was his wife. And she was a very sophisticated lady from New York City. She was a widow with 4 children. But when she and Chapman married, she decided to be part of his life. And she was not about to stay home. Here she is, and this is in Florida near Lake Okeechobee. And you can see it was rough camping. And she learned the first time she was with him, he taught her how to make a bird skin. And that's not for the squeamish. And he wrote his other friends, his peers and his supervisor there at the American Museum. He was so proud of his girl because she could do it better than he could. And so when I wrote the story of Audubon, it was also the story of his wife, also the story of his peers. He knew everybody, all the big names. Let's go on to the next one here. Oh, step back, one more. This is Oak Lodge, and it's on the Indian River Lagoon. The lady in white at the far right is Ma Latham. And Ma ran this lodge, and the great naturalists, the great scientists came to the lodge to study that pristine Indian River Lagoon. In fact, Chapman brought his wife, was a working honeymoon. He brought her here. That marriage, by the way, almost ended because she told him, the one thing I can't stand is snakes. And he told her, oh, there's no snakes down there. The first day they saw like a half dozen, and she actually wrote her son by previous marriage, and he came because he thought the marriage was over. But obviously she got over her fear of snakes. But Ma Latham here to the right, she told them on their honeymoon about a place called Pelican Island, where the pelicans had a rookery. At that time, I think it was the last rookery on the eastern coast of Florida. And now plume hunters shot those up if they didn't have anything better, but the problem was tourists. And we're talking about, she got married in 1898. The steamboats came up there and disgorged their tourists, their passengers. Some of them carried guns, and they shot these birds. They robbed the nests. They had dogs that ran through the nests and eggs, and Chapman saw that on the advice of Ma Latham. Just a brief note: she was totally uneducated. She was a cracker. She was of a lower class, but one of his great characteristics was he never judged somebody by their accent or their lack of formal education. He knew people who grew up with these birds, with the wildlife in that habitat, often knew a great deal, and he always respected them. And he had great respect for this lady. I could go on for a while. She's another person that figured hard.
So Jim, can
Getting
I
ready to
ask you
wrap
a
it up?
question? Yeah, I just want to, well, not a question, but maybe have you talk a little about when Chapman lost his eyesight for a while, his wife really did his job, right? And for a long time.
Well, she wrote his letters. She did a lot of things. She was in charge of, she was sort of head of the photographic inventory. And when they began, you're talking about huge cameras, bulky, with glass negatives. Well, she took care of that. And or she was a camp cook. He said she was a great camp cook. She did whatever it took for her husband. And she went up to the St. Lawrence to Bird Rock with him, and climbed those cliffs that were slick with guano. I mean, this was a really incredible woman.
Yeah,
And
but he did lose
all
his sight
life-
for a while. Am I correct, right? He lost his sight for a while from something, and then she.
Yes, I'll just finish up saying his wife. What was I going to say about her? Well, she was. Oh, he always called her my best field assistant.
Yeah.
And what a statement to make. Yes, he lost his eyesight in Colombia. I believe it was the 1912-1913 expedition. And, I can't remember the disease that it was, but he was almost blind, and he went home, and for about 3 or 4 months, they weren't sure if his eyesight would return. And his wife handled all his correspondence. So she did step into his shoes in that sense, Don.
Yeah, amazing. So many things I took away from your book were certainly about her and what an adventurer that he really was. You always see the pictures of him in these nice little suits, but he risked his life out there. And it's amazing that he survived some of these exploits that he was on. And again, one of my favorite things that maybe we could talk about later is birthdays, who I became a big fan of from your book.
And he
Who
also
was-
was early on in
I'm-
photography, I believe. Didn't
Yep.
he have the first film that was shown in the White House, and that was to Teddy Roosevelt, I think you told us, James?
Yes, that's true. He was, there were several Englishmen, I think their names were Cherry. They beat him to the punch, but he was probably the first or among the first. In 1900, he definitely published the first book, Bird Study with a Camera. And I recommend to everybody to read that. Now, a lot of it is technical about the right camera, et cetera, and that's all outdated. And but skip that. The footnotes, he talks about these birds, and no one describe birds and habitat like Frank Chapman. He takes you right there into the picture. And he was a great writer. He was a great photographer. He was a great ornithologist. He was a great museum administrator, and I've probably forgotten several other things. He was a Renaissance man, as they say.
So I think well, if you don't mind, we'll go on to Steve Quinn and we'll get back later. So Steve, do you want me to stop the show, or you want me to keep the pictures up?
Oh, the pictures are fine, Don. Sure.
Okay. All right.
In my own case, I started working at the American Museum of Natural History in 1974 after graduating from art school. And the wonderful thing about, I soon became aware of the significance of Frank Chapman in the design and development of exhibits. It was Frank Chapman that really established the protocol in the museum of gathering a team of artists and ornithologists and bringing them into the field to create what we now refer to as dioramas or habitat groups at the museum. When you think of the time when these exhibits were created, it predated sophisticated photography, sophisticated moving film. You can think of them as the very first forms of virtual reality. In other words, you would stand before these exhibits and really have the sense of wonder and awe of nature before you. And it was Frank Chapman that really demanded that these scenes depict not just a suggestion of the environment or the habitat in which these animals lived, but an exact duplication of a specific place in nature. So that tradition has continued on in the museum. And some of his earlier dioramas, like the one here that Don has put on the screen, the Cuthbert Rookery, has great significance. When it was first installed at the American Museum, the text for this exhibit stated that this is likely the place where the last great egret, or at that time American egret, and roseate spoonbill will be shot. That was the thought at that time, that wading birds that were being hunted to the extinction for the millinery trade for plumes were in such dire condition that Frank Chapman traveled down to the Everglades and collected the botanical specimens and the bird specimens themselves to recreate Cuthbert Rookery back at the museum to tell this story. And the text for the exhibit also told the tragic story of Guy Bradley's death in protecting this rucku. This is the very place where Guy Bradley, one of the very first Audubon wardens who was assigned to protect this sanctuary, was killed. You know, these exhibits played a very big role in turning the tide against using feathers for fashion. And also, I think one of my favorites in the Hall of North American Birds, which Frank Chapman would go on and use this exhibit medium, the diorama, with the painted background and the three-dimensional foreground, to create the first ever exhibit in the world which utilized this medium to tell the story and nurture an awareness of birds and the protection of their environments at the museum. The one diorama that really is my favorite is the diorama that features the Hackensack Meadowlands. I would encourage you all to visit the Hall of North American Birds. This diorama depicts the Meadowlands in the early 1900s. Now, all of us know the Meadowlands today and know the Hackensack River. But this diorama, when you gaze on it, it features wild rice, cattails, wood ducks, sorrel, bobolinks, and swamp sparrow. And it really, today, we think of the Meadowlands more as Spartina, salt marsh, you know, a much more saline environment. Well, the reason for that is, again, Chapman was very adamant in displaying things as they really are. And when he collected for that exhibit, the Oradell Dam was not in place. In the 1930s, the Hackensack River was dammed, and that stopped the fresh water from coming down the Hackensack River and influencing the vegetation and the bird life in the lower Hackensack meadows. So that dam stopped the fresh water and allowed the tidal flow to come way up into the Hackensack River Meadowlands system. So today, most of the Meadowlands are Spartina and more saline ecosystem. But back then, when you see this exhibit in the museum, it was very much wild rice and wood ducks and sorrels and bobolink. It was a very different ecosystem, and that was the Meadowlands that Frank Chapman grew up in. So his protocol in visiting the exact site and duplicating nature, all of these exhibits that he's created, they can be used almost as a litmus paper for what the environment looks like today and how we've altered it and how we've changed it. Because of his discipline in depicting a real place in nature, these exhibits show us how we've changed the environment, how we've influenced them. And other great naturalists at the museum embraced Chapman's techniques and methods and protocols. For instance, the great African hall in the museum that has the big African elephants in the center of it, that was Carl Akeley, the great African naturalist. And he embraced Chapman's methods and brought a team of artists into the field and again, depicted actual places in nature in Africa. Many of those exhibits were influential. As a matter of fact, his mountain gorilla diorama was influential in creating the very first national park in all of Africa. So Chapman's embracing of art and using art and exhibits to shape people's views and perceptions of nature were terrific. They just had such a very profound effect on people preserving and saving ecosystems. So when I came to the museum, I was very much a part of that protocol and was sent into the field myself on a number of expeditions, and found myself carrying out many of the tasks that Chapman had when he was in the field himself, in providing for museum exhibits and depicting actual locations in nature.
Don, could I just add a brief postscript to that, those excellent points that Steve made?
Absolutely.
You know, one individual who was inspired by one of his dioramas, it was a diorama of Pelican Island, and that was Teddy Roosevelt.
Yeah.
And young Chapman came in with William Deutscher, who was then a leading light in the Audubon Society, to the White House to try to convince Theodore Roosevelt that the federal government should protect Pelican Island in the Indian River Lagoon. Well, Roosevelt had never seen Pelican Island, but he had been to the American Museum and he had seen Chapman's diorama. And that was part of the reason he said, "I so declare," the first bird refuge in the great system that we know today. I just thought I'd throw that in there.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
That's terrific, James. And you know, that was the very first federal bird reservation that Roosevelt created back during his administration. And Roosevelt would go on to create 31 more, which in large part were due to Chapman and his dioramas and his urging. And that first series of federal bird reservations would eventually turn into the National Wildlife Refuge System and morph into the Federal Division of Fish and Wildlife, which is just, it's wonderful to think that a work of art has such significance to influence political views and start such a great campaign. You know, the other thing to mention is Chapman was such a great supporter of the arts and in the arts in the way they could influence perceptions. And it was Chapman who embraced the great bird artist, Louis Agassiz Fuertes. And there was a terrific relationship between Chapman and Louis Agassiz Fuertes. Fuertes would accompany Chapman on his many expeditions. And I hope your listeners have seen some of Fuertes' work, because Fuertes was not just a bird painter, a bird artist. He was a bird portraitist. He was with Chapman when he was collecting birds in the field. And often many of these birds were new to science. So it was Fuertes' job to sit down with a freshly painted specimen and do a watercolor sketch to capture all the fleeting colors of, you know, facial skin and bill and feet and color before it fleeted, before it was gone. And Chapman also was instrumental in bringing Francis Lee Jaques, another great bird painter and wildlife painter, to the museum to paint diorama backgrounds. So he was a great pioneer in the early history of the American Museum of Natural History.
That would be a good place for me to jump in.
Yeah, Jim, take it away.
I'm going to share my screen.
Okay, I'm going to stop this one. Okay.
And let's see if I can get this up there. Okay, this is one of my favorite dioramas. And if you look in the background, you look at the background of my Zoom screenshot in the background is the Palisades. And this is a peregrine falcon nest, a scrape on the Palisades. And this is back in the days when the only people who ever saw something like this were probably egg collectors or hunters or people trying to steal young falcons. And these days, you can go online and you can see around the world, there's always a live streaming peregrine nest somewhere in Australia, Northern Hemisphere, wherever it is, and you will see all these falcons nesting on top of buildings, typically, or bridges. And this is one of the few times you can actually see what it was like to see a peregrine scrape in the wild. And it's nothing but a little scratches in the side of a cliff on a ledge. And there's this amazing diorama with the peregrine flying in with a pigeon attached. And when you see this diorama in person, you feel like you're there. And then you look and you see the 3 chicks there waiting to be fed. You can almost hear them screaming like peregrine falcon chicks do. And one of the things I really like, this is, when you see the diorama, you can't see where the bird is flying. It's almost magical. And to think that Frank Chapman was part of this creation way back when is amazing. And for all of us who live in Bergen County in North Jersey and revere State Line Lookout in the Palisades, this diorama is unbelievable. And next time you're at the American Museum of Natural History, you have to see it. I want to share one other thing. If you look closely, these are the 3 peregrine chicks with their huge feet. And if you look very closely at all the bones in the picture, if you look on the far left, a friend pointed this out. There's actually a pigeon band, a racing pigeon band on a leg of a pigeon bone that's in the scrape. And about 10 years before this thing was built, I found an article talking about someone who had come across a peregrine falcon eyrie at Hook Mountain, and they found 10 racing pigeon racing bands in the nest. And I think, knowing Chapman and his eye for detail, he took one of those pigeon bands from an actual pigeon on the Palisades and put it in the diorama. And I'm just blown away whenever I see this, because it is, to this day, probably the best depiction of a peregrine eyrie that I could imagine. And is one of the ancestral homes of these guys. And it is maybe 5 miles from where Chapman grew up. So this was almost in his backyard, same as the Meadowlands. And you just get a great appreciation for the scholarship that went into all these dioramas and everything else that Chapman did. This is something a friend at the American Museum showed me. We were down in one of the basements, and he pulls out a drawer. And if you read Jim Huffstadt's book, talks about William Brewster and Chapman heading up a river in search of the ivory-billed woodpecker. And you can see this is the top of the box, and it says the Suwannee River, Florida, by F.M. Chapman and William Brewster. And you open up the drawer and you see the lid, and you're just dying to see what's inside. And this is the only known skeleton of an ivory-billed woodpecker in existence anywhere in the world. And it's in the American Museum of Natural History, collected by Frank Chapman. And Jim's book mentions, how overwhelmed Chapman was when he actually shot this guy and skinned it there and saved the skeleton. And his friend Brewster was kind of appalled by it all, to think that one of the last ivory-billed woodpeckers was shot by Frank Chapman. Even back in those days, it was fairly rare. But you look at it, and it's like a time capsule of another time, and you can get a sense of what these ivory-billed woodpeckers were like that you really can't get from a drawing. And this is the skeleton, what it would look like. And you can see what its claws were like. I put a quarter next to the talons so you can see what the woodpecker's talons look like. And they also have an ivory-billed and a pileated woodpecker skulls next to each other. And I put a quarter next to them for size, but these are gigantic birds, and the ivory-billed was larger than any woodpecker around these days, and it's sort of a dinosaur in that way. And it's such in keeping with the American Museum, they have this skeleton there. Just wanted to mention, we also talked a little about photography, and on the left is the cover of the very first Birdlore magazine, and one of the articles is the camera as an aid in the study of birds. And it was revolutionary in the day that someone would write all about this sort of thing. And every time I opened Birdlore magazine in the old days, Chapman's contributions there were incredible as well. And some of the early Birdlores, it will say the Macmillan Company, Englewood, New Jersey. And I thought that was pretty cool as well, that this is a local guy who was so spectacular. I happened to throw this in because I found it, I wanted to put it in my book about screech owls. That's a picture Frank Chapman took in 1903 with a time-lapse camera, time-lapse film to get a screech owl way back in the day. That might be the first photograph of a screech owl ever. So with that, I will let you get back to you guys. One mentioned also, Frank Chapman was instrumental in trying to get children interested in nature, and he'd have these contests where the kids could write in about their favorite walk, and then he would give prizes. And I just love that mentality of trying to get young people involved in nature. So with that, I'll hand it back to you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Jim.
I will stop sharing my screen. That would help.
So, James, I think we'll bring it back to you. To comment on anything else before we start taking questions.
Well, you know, I've learned a lot tonight, and I don't want to sound immodest. I know a lot about Frank Chapman, but I learned more things tonight from these gentlemen, and that's not surprising to me. Just a couple of brief comments triggered by what was said tonight. They mentioned him skeletonizing this species that was on the edge of extinction. Of course, we all know about the controversy. Some feel that it's still somewhere in the Louisiana bayous. But that aside, I did a program on the book once, and a lady, a very well-informed lady, said she despised Chapman and his whole tribe because they were bird blasters. They killed birds by the thousands. They were hypocrites. Now, I don't share her viewpoint, and I tried to explain, I hope I made it. The point is, at the time he began in the 1880s, photography, optics, as in binoculars, they were primitive. And to really study a bird, to know it, you needed the actual bird in hand, or to paint it. You needed that. And I think one of the greatest revelations that came to me, that surprised me, was that as early as the 1890s, William Brewster of of course, his collection was the beginning of Harvard's bird collection, and the Museum of Comparative Zoology. Brewster is the one who brought that about. But he and Chapman, they wrote very intimate correspondence. They spoke about their feelings. They both were appalled by this miserable collecting. They weren't keen on killing these birds, and they said to one another, I'd just like to go out one time and look at these birds and appreciate them. And part of the reason that they did that is they didn't have the tools. But as the more sophisticated cameras, as the motion picture camera came about, and the wonderful optics that were being developed at that time, largely in Germany, that enabled them to move away from that. And of course, the ornithologists still occasionally will take a species, but they confided in one another, and they also admitted to one another in the 1890s that the museums were killing far too many birds than they needed, that it was basically a race. We want to have more bird skins than the British Museum. And that was
Yes, I
sad.
think.
Don, if I might,
Sure.
add something, is that okay?
Sure, yes.
Oh, okay. James, I really appreciate you bringing that up, because to speak in Chapman's defense, if you'll remember that John James Audubon, the person that the Audubon Society is named after, shot every one of the birds he painted. And that's why his paintings are as wonderful as they are, because he studied them in such close detail. Now, ornithology as a science does require that we collect specimens from the field. And when I was assigned to accompany expeditions, at risk of losing favor with your members in Bergen County Audubon, I was required to shoot birds and collect them. And I consider myself very fortunate to be on one African expedition in 1993, where we collected a species that was previously unknown to science, a new species. In order to define that species as a newly described species, you must collect tissue samples, you must collect a series of specimens, which we did. And this was the Zonga bush robin, a new species of bird described to science. So I know it's difficult for some people to understand that you could do anything as terrible as killing a bird, but it's really a part of the science and the way science is done. So I do appreciate you bringing this up, James. You know, no one, it's actually, speaking for myself, I felt so privileged to be a part of a scientific expedition that was gathering data on a very remote area in Africa in order to define its value in terms of its biodiversity to assure its protection. And the collection of vertebrates was very critical in doing that. So this was part of Chapman's job.
I was going to say,
I'll leave it at
Steve,
that.
yeah, I was going to say, Steve, that back in those, whether you were a market hunter or whatever, that they never thought that, they thought the wildlife was endless, that there was no way that they could ever make anything extinct because it would just go on forever.
Right, right.
And then even Audubon and then Chapman knew that, hey, these birds are disappearing. And then the idea was, we better collect some of them before they are gone for good. So we have them for assigned studies. So there's a lot going on, and I don't think that would be right to judge him or anybody else at that time for collecting the birds. I don't, that's kind of changing times. If somebody was out shooting birds nowadays, then that would be a different story. But
The other thing that's happening is all these old specimens are filled with incredible DNA and things, and we're learning more and more about what the environment was like back in those days.
Right.
And as a friend at the Academy of Natural Sciences in Philadelphia said, we have these wonderful time capsules. And with science evolving, we may learn things we never knew we could learn from these old bones and these old eggs and old
Yeah.
bird skins in 10 years that we never knew we could have found out.
Correct,
was-
Jim.
Yeah, it was a
Right.
different time. It was, it was a different time, and we can't put what we would do now on a different time, and an important part of the time. I think that we all need to learn more about the legacy of Chapman. And like I said earlier, there should be a national park. There should at least be a state park. There should be much more. It should be a common name as the name Audubon in not only the birding world, but in conservation. And with our numbers of losing 3 billion birds since 1970, with any history, we don't know where we're going unless we know where we've been. And to take those lessons of the day of Chapman and what he had to do to save the birds and what he saw, I think we need to take those lessons now into this day and be more proactive in saving the species that we need to do.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, John. The thing that I admire the most about Chapman is he saw himself as an educator. At the museum, there were many academics that viewed participating in educational efforts in the development of exhibits that would support wildlife conservation as being an intrusion into their research and into their ivory towers.
Mhm.
But Chapman, most of his career at the museum was dedicated to raising awareness, developing field guides, nurturing bird watching as a critical tool to environmental awareness, and using exhibits to raise people's awareness and appreciation of the natural world. He didn't have an ornithology degree, but he was the great power that really started, his Bird Lore magazine morphed into Audubon Magazine. He was critical as a player in the creation of the Audubon Society. He's just a great hero in American ornithology.
Speaking of education, James, in your book that he would go out and do free programs at libraries or wherever he could, especially to immigrant populations, that he said sometimes he wasn't sure understood English, but he would
That's
take
right,
the conservation word out there. Am I right about that?
Oh, you're absolutely right. I remember he went into one of the early ghettos around the early 1900s in New York. I don't recall the ethnic mix there, but there was a policeman on hand in case there were problems, because in those days, it was not the best part of town. But it didn't bother him. If you were interested in birds, he wanted to help you out. And he didn't have, in many ways, he was a progressive. As I mentioned, he didn't have class prejudices. If you knew birds, if you grew up with birds, he wanted to hear what you had to say. He didn't care if your syntax was wrong. He wanted to know what you had to say. And also, he was very open to women. He had great respect for his wife, Elsie Nomberg, who wrote The Birds of the Mato Grosso and the birds of that area in Brazil. Just a quick story about that. 1916, a year before we got into World War I, she interviewed for a job. She was educated in the best universities of Imperial Germany. She was a woman, and she also was Jewish. And she went in there with a great deal of trepidation, and she became his greatest admirer. He said he treated her just like anybody else. The common bond was the love of nature, the love of birds. And interestingly enough, when he died, she and her husband began with a nice donation of money, the Chapman Scholarship Program, which goes on today and, helps many young ornithologists in their research. So, I've got my hats off to him. Now, I wish I could say that he was more open-minded about race. He was not, and that's unfortunate. But again, that was the world he grew up. He was born in 1864 in the Civil War, and I'm not excusing him for that, but I think you need to. We're so quick to judge people that lived 150 years ago, and maybe we should pause and wonder, well, maybe 150 years from now, other people will be judging us pretty harshly for what we believe.
Yeah, that's a
But
good point.
anyway,
So I think the challenge.
I would just like to wrap up with one item
Yeah.
here, kind of a. I have been so encouraged by the response to the book that I'm in the process of revising and expanding it. I had cut 5 chapters from the book, and I'm going to reissue it with the chapters restored, double the photos, and also with the help of many, and I confess here, this was my first book that was self-published. And I was foolish enough to think that I could be the author, the publisher, and the editor, and I didn't. And most people are too kind to mention this, but there's all kinds of typos. There's all kinds of style problems. And I think oh gosh, I could go down. I think I managed, even with spell check, to misspell Van Gogh's name. It's Van Gogh or something like that. So I'm revising it and trying to clean it up. And I'll let you folks know when it's out. And I'm also trying to get it into libraries. I didn't realize that libraries, the other books that I've written through regular publishers, libraries picked them up left and right. Not so with self-published books. They see that Amazon.com and they figure it's what used to be called the vanity press. And so it's hard to get out there, but that's one of my goals. I'm open to suggestion. I want to get it into libraries so people can learn about it. Anyway, I can't help but think I want to thank everybody here, and Rick Wright. I don't know if he's here tonight. So many of you were so helpful. Don, of course, he wrote the Meadowland book, which was a great contribution, and that's my goal. I want people to remember Frank Chapman. I haven't even made my first million on this book, so it's I'm not worried about that.
I like to encourage you. I can encourage you by saying that a lot of our local libraries are carrying your book.
Yep.
So
they are.
Oh,
Yes.
Because
yes.
I've checked it out on a site called World Catalog. They list all the libraries that carry it, and I only saw 2, and they weren't in New Jersey.
Oh no, yeah. Well,
This is from the library.
Tammy's holding up a book that she got at the library.
Same here.
Yeah, see that?
Really?
So it's out there.
What library was it?
Teaneck.
Phoenix?
Yeah.
Phoenix, Arizona?
Palisade
Yes.
Park.
And
Palisade
mine
Park.
says, written in here, Frank was born and raised in Teaneck. So right in the library book, it talks about him and says he's a local
Yeah.
guy.
Yeah.
Okay, well, that's encouraging. That's encouraging. And,
So what do you say we open
but
it up?
anyway,
to,
thank you for the privilege of talking tonight. I
well,
enjoyed it very
we,
much.
we love it, and I didn't pay attention to any typos in your book. I probably just loved it so much I just zipped right past them and didn't notice them. So not to worry. But I'd like to open it up to any questions that anybody has, so you can unmute yourself and ask away.
Hey, this is to be just to follow up on that last point. Last week, I encountered at the library in Teaneck an amazing rebuff. I asked if the library was going to be acquiring any of my books, which are self-published on Amazon. I have quite a few, and a librarian told me there's a policy in Buckles, Bergen County library system, not to buy or catalog self-published books. So I called the executive director of Buckles and I said, I just want to check something out. Is there a policy? Because I was told in Teaneck Library, there's a policy not to buy self-published books in Buckles. And the executive director said, no such policy exists. So there's a lot of uphill battle to get a book that's not published by Norton or some other big publisher into a lot of libraries. And yeah, you know what the main problem is, if you ask me? It's not a one-click button to include it, all the library information into your catalog. You have to actually type out the title and author and things like that. So, you know, when you think about it for a minute, a lot of great publications are out there are not getting the treatment that they should because of ignorance, but there is no policy to exclude them. And that I wanted to just make sure I followed up on that. The other thing that I wanted to follow up on is the importance of photography. That last week or this week even, it hit me because I got myself a camera, a new camera, and I started taking pictures on a field trip this week with Don and all of you guys. And it changed the experience to have a camera and to think about taking the pictures of the birds and capturing them, whether in flight or just sitting or in the tree. It really did heighten the experience and changed it significantly. So I wouldn't have even thought about that, except that I happened by a chance to have the opportunity to get a new camera this week. So
Chapman was a pioneer in that.
that's amazing. It's amazing. And I can understand it. I really can. And just to the other point, to go back to this was a great presentation and discussion. And I really want to thank you guys for putting it together and doing such a great job. I just like the whole tone and the whole way in which people interact. It's so informative. I'm new to the whole thing, and I'm learning a lot about birds and about the history of those people involved with nature. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Spi. That is very kind of you. Anybody else have any questions or comments or?
Yeah, I have a question. Steve, when they started the dioramas, was the public's reaction? Was it like an event? I mean, now we go to the museum, you know, on a continuous basis, but was it like an unveiling? And how did the public react to the actually seeing the dioramas?
Well, it was a new exhibit medium. So the museum did unveil North American birds, and it was well received and often attended. I will tell you about a little dark museum secret, and that is that before I retired from the museum, we had an effort to restore the Hall of North American Birds. And the title of the Hall of North American Birds was always the Frank Chapman Memorial Hall of North American Birds. And the title panel was a large panel at the entrance, and one of the artists of in the exhibition department did a painting of a bald eagle flying into the hall. And she took a little, we had to paint out the title of the hall so that she could complete the painting. So for a while, I would say probably a month, because it took her a while to paint the picture of the bald eagle. For a while, there was no title on the hall. During that time, the development office perceived that the hall was unnamed. And there was a very disgruntled museum benefactor. And the development office said, well, this is a perfect opportunity to satisfy someone. And they renamed the hall the Sanford without, not, I don't want to demean Mr. Sanford, but he made great contributions to the museum. But if you go to the museum today, it's called the Sanford Hall of North American Birds. So when this came about, I was so furious that the museum had forgotten Frank Chapman's great contributions to American ornithology that I contacted the president of the museum and voiced my complaint. But by that time, all of the administrators had communicated to Mr. Sanford, the Sanford family, that this was going to happen. So if you come to the museum to see Frank Chapman's dioramas, you'll negotiate using the Sanford Hall of North American Mammals, but inside you will find a bust of Frank Chapman and a panel which it really clearly specifies that this is Frank Chapman's great hall. So I was in charge of that that restoration of the hall, and I apologize in advance for the artist taking so long to complete that painting of the bald eagle. But at any rate, that explains why the hall is no longer called the Frank Chapman Memorial of North American Birds.
Thanks for explaining that, because it really bugged me.
Yes, it bugs. I tell you, it bugs me, Jim.
When I went there last, the bust of Frank Chapman was in the dark. He couldn't even see it. So I sent a complaint letter to them. I said, hey, could you put a light on the guy?
Good for you. Good for you, Jim. Good for you.
Yeah, so,
Well,
Now, I will say, let me say this. If all of you attend the museum and visit the hall and write the museum administration and say this is outrageous that this hall is named for someone other than Frank Chapman, please do so.
yeah, look at that. Oh, man.
There it is.
There you go. Perfect. Thank you.
I was so annoyed I took a picture of it.
Good for you, Jim. Good for you.
Well, could I just add one comment? I would like to see, as I have in many modern museums, they have these kiosks where you come up to a kiosk and you push a button and there's a video screen and you see a presentation, usually a brief one. And Stephen, I would like to see the museum in the appropriate area, in one of the bird areas, have such a kiosk showing that wonderful tribute to Chapman that you recorded some years ago, that at least the last time I saw was on the website about the legacy. That was, you covered everything, just, it's so succinctly, yet you really gave the man credit for so many things. And it's I had my granddaughter she transcribed that for me for the book, because I used that as kind of a rough guideline on how I was going to approach it. And I'd like to see that happen.
And by the way,
Thank
that video, that YouTube video, I posted today on Facebook. So anybody that wants to see Steve talking about Steve Quinn in the museum can just go on our Facebook page and watch it.
Oh, thank you. Thanks, James, and thank you, Dawn. But probably based on this presentation tonight, my pension is going to be cut off from the museum, and you know, I'll be in poverty. So I'll be coming to the Bergen County Audubon Society for support.
Anybody else have a question at all? A
I
comment?
was just gonna say, there's nothing left on Jim's skeleton that you can have a meal from, so we'll have to find a different solution.
Anybody else like to make a comment or ask a question?
I just wanted to say, if anyone wants to actually look at his Chapman's journals and his original field guide and stuff, there's a website, archive.org, and you can look at the actual books there on your screen. It's very, very interesting. They showed the blind that he made with the flamingos.
Oh, terrific! Yes,
It's a cool site.
terrific.
You can also go back and look at all the old bird lore, probably on that same site, starting in 1900 and seeing all the amazing things he was doing 125 years ago.
Terrific guy.
So really, everybody should pick up the book and read it, and it's really great, and it's just an amazing book. And James, the amazing information that you gathered in that book is really incredible, and you know, you'll learn a lot more than you ever imagined about Chapman and everything going on, and Teddy Roosevelt and those amazing days of early birding or early ornithology. Again, I always say you can't, you know, we need to take lessons from that time. We need to understand where we are. Because we're getting to be at those crossroads now, maybe at the same crossroads they are, maybe even a harder time. You know, they saw things that they had to save, but ours, with climate change and so many issues really harming bird populations and pollinator populations, that we need to have a more concerted, organized effort to make those changes in society and in the environment the way they did in Chapman's time.
And I'd just like to say that I've been a member of Bergen County Audubon since I was 13 years old. I won't tell you how old I am now, but I will say that I have never seen the Bergen County Audubon Society so proactive in environmental issues and in education. And I just can't commend the Bergen County Audubon Society enough, and its great work that it's doing to promote environmental education. And I just can't say enough to thank Don Torino and all the administration of the Bergen County Audubon Society for their great work. Thank you very much, you guys.
Thank you. Much appreciated, Steve. Thank you.
Don?
Yes.
Hi,
Nancy.
it's Nancy. Yeah, I have to confess I did not read the entire book, but I did get halfway through it. And I think the one example that's really important for young people, and even for, for me, this old lady, is that sometimes you just have to follow a dream, and you have to give up, the finance. This guy was a banker, he was uneducated, and yet he achieved a great deal. He was a very interesting guy. And yet he followed a passion. And I think that's great for young people. It's about following your instinct and your love of something. And in his case, it was nature. And I thought that was a beautiful message that the book carried throughout it. So I just wanted to make that comment, even though I didn't finish it. Don't tell me the end. I think I can guess. Thanks, guys.
Well, that's a good point, though, that it's an amazing story, amazing life, and much more amazing than you even realize until you read this book, So, yeah.
I would like to just briefly mention, first of all, thank you, Nancy, for your honesty. I appreciate that. And I'm just glad that you got halfway through. So that pleases me. But that was an excellent point, and I wanted to mention that myself. And Chapman was mentored to so many great people, and you see this chain. If you read his life, you see where his predecessors, guided him. And then he, in turn, during the golden age of the American Museum of Natural History, largely recruited a staff that each one of them is worthy of a book or certainly a mention in the history of ornithology. And it's a group effort. We've got to work together and we can achieve great things. Chapman, he always said the same things to young people. He'd say, my first advice to you, if you want to be an ornithologist or work in wildlife, is don't, because you probably won't be able to support a family and you'll have a tough time getting through life and finding a job. He says, but if there's no other choice in your mind, because the only thing you want to do is study birds, then go ahead and I'll do my best to help you. And so anyway, thanks for bringing that up.
Still the same, James. Still the same way. Yeah, that hasn't changed, I don't think. Yep. When I meet so many, and there's so many great young people out there, I gotta say, and when they tell me, they're going for conservation, for college, or ornithology, my first comment to them is, well, I guess you like being broke. And they say, yeah, we got to do what we got to do. So yeah, they're committed. So yeah, when people criticize young people and young generation, there's great young conservationists out there. It really is. Yeah. Anybody else? Comment?
Maybe just to remind us, in addition to getting James's book from the libraries, which is wonderful that they carry it. James, can you also remind us how the other ways that we can get our hands on a copy of your book, please?
Well, the easiest way is to go to amazonbooks.com and put in the title or the author's name, and it'll come right up. It's very easy to order. There's electronic versions, which I believe are only $3. And then there's a hardback version, which is only $16.95. So it's easy to order the book. The Man Who Loved Birds. You put in The Man Who Loved Birds, it should come right up on the Amazon Books site.
I recommend the electronic version. It's instantaneous gratification.
Yep. Any other comments or questions?
No, I just want to say that all of you did a great job, all you speakers. I love the fact that we were able to see all the dioramas and the pictures, the old pictures. It was just a wonderful overview of who this man was, and perhaps where we're going. I mean, they had to kill birds, then the camera came, etc. All the new technology. I guess my question to Steve is, the diorama, I mean, that was new technology back in the day. You had artists and they did these wonderful drawings. And now, of course, we're in a virtual world. So the museum has tried to keep up with that, but the dioramas are still historically so beautiful.
Well,
How do you feel about that?
well, it's very interesting that you should mention that, Nancy. Thanks for bringing that up. You know, the dioramas provide a very personal, visceral experience. You know, it's as close, the dioramas with their background paintings and the three-dimensional foreground and the mounted specimens in the foreground provide as close a natural experience in nature that can be provided. You know, we have experimented at the museum with new technologies, but most of those technologies you can experience on a laptop. You know, when we provide exhibit techniques where you pull a lever or push a button or flip a panel, it all becomes about pulling a lever or pushing a button or flipping a panel. You know, when you stand before a diorama that is so well executed in terms of Chapman's envisioning, you know, you are standing before the grandeur and magnificence of nature. And your heart, it's all about tugging your heartstrings. It's not about facts. It's not about data. It's about our own connection with the natural world and how critically important and how wonderful and beautiful the natural world is. So there's no real substitute for that. And the museum is finally realizing that and preserving those historical dioramas. And I'm pleased to see that.
Yeah.
Well
Marilyn,
said.
before I forget, Marilyn, we're gonna make some donations tonight, right? Donations.
Yes, we are. Thank you for reminding me to say. So as you all may know, that frequently when we have a speaker or presenter and they've prepared and spent time to prepare and also their time during the program itself, and we appreciate that very much. And there frequently is a remuneration, a fee that we provide to the speaker, and it's usually because the speaker also requests a fee. But our three presenters tonight are really genuine gentlemen and genuinely lovers of Frank Chapman and admirers. So I'm very, very happy to tell all of you that none of our speakers tonight have asked for any payment, but I did want, and I felt, and I brought it to the board, and the majority of our board felt that we should at least express our appreciation because they're helping us learn. They've spent time to prepare and they're here with us this evening. So what we are doing is, on behalf of James, our author tonight, we are earmarking $100 to spend on supplies and necessities for the Frank Chapman Trail that Bergen County Audubon maintains and enriches here in Teaneck. And for Jim, in the past, Jim had let me know when he's been our presenter that he would appreciate a donation to the Raptor Trust. And so I just took it upon myself to think that that's what Jim might want us to do in lieu of somebody, a different organization. So we will make a donation, Jim, on your behalf to the Raptor Trust. And for Steve's involved in a preserve, and I'm sorry, Steve, is it Richfield or Richfield Park?
Richfield Park.
In Richfield Park, and earlier this year, our Audubon did provide a grant to provide some supplies towards the efforts that are being made there. So for all three of you, there will be a $100 each contribution to those entities, a total of $300. But for Steve, I know that you're away, which makes me appreciate even more that you took time to be with us tonight. When you get back, please just send an email to me to remind me of where the funds should be sent and to whom the payment should be made payable. I
Thank you so
also
much. Thank you.
thank you. Thank all.
Thank you.
And I do
Thank you
also
very
want to wish everyone happy holidays and a very happy, healthy new year as well. Good luck with the bird count that will be going on this weekend. And thank you all for joining us tonight. And again, all of our presenters, thank you very much for helping us learn. I
Thank you,
appreciate
Marilyn,
it.
for all your hard work putting this
Yes.
together. And James, I'll
was
leave
a-
it, you leave it to our author for our parting words.
Oh, I don't know. I think I may have talked myself out, which is probably a milestone in my life. But it was so gratifying to talk to you folks, and I got a special place in my heart for Bergen County and the people that remember Frank Chapman. And maybe someday, it's probably a dream, but maybe someday I'll get up there and I can walk the Chapman Trail. And I would love to do it with some of you and get to meet you in person.
That
You
would be
never
cool.
know. You never know what
Yeah, you
tomorrow
never know.
brings. And
Thank you,
Thank
James.
Yeah, thank you, everybody. This has
Thank
been
you.
great. I enjoyed it. Thank you, everybody. Thanks, guys. And let's get out there and count the birds on Saturday.
Yeah. Thank you, Bergen County
Hi.
Audubon.
Thank you,
amen.
everybody.
Thanks, everybody. Have a Merry Christmas and healthy, Happy New Year.
Yeah. Happy holidays, everyone.
Peace on earth.
Good idea.
Peace.
See you
Happy
outside.
Hanukkah. Bye-bye.
Wow. Thanks, Mark.